Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to Not Funny Politics presents Red Dwarf Rewatch. I'm your host, Dr. John, but hopefully you read the title credits, you would know that too. But we are now moving into Series 3. We keep going here. So now we are moving on to Episode 2, Marooned. Directed, as usual, by Ed By, written by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, released on November 21st, 1989. I want to make a correction. I think I've had November 11th last episode. It's November 14th. Well, let's get into it, starting with a summary. The crew has to abandon the ship because Holly thinks that they are encountering 5 black holes, which is amazing since they managed to avoid them this whole time, and then they show up. It's in their direct flight path, and so in the midst of the evacuation, they're all offloading. Rimmer and Lister basically find themselves in Starbug, which crash lands on a planet, and they're marooned. Lister is freezing and starving. He needs firewood, and he is convinced to sort of give up his beloved guitar, but he doesn't. Instead, he burns Rimmer's prized possessions instead, and the only food left turns out at one point to be dog food and a pot noodle, and Lister hates the pot noodle. So, let's move on to breaking down this episode a little bit more. So to move us back just a little bit, this episode is considered to be what we call a bottle episode, mainly concerning dialogue with no real change in scenery. If you know, you know. Community did a lovely job with this one, I believe, when they did their own little version of a bottle episode where everybody was stuck in the library study room. So we once again have established our new intro of sort of montages of things from this season, even though they do include the little stone dropping one from Thanks for the Memories from Series 2. That is still included, but most of the scenes are from episodes in Series 3. And so we open with them immediately in the process of abandoning ship, the emergency, Rimmer trying to talk to Holly, and this is where we get the whole thing about black holes in space and how they're both black, and it's very hard to see. And then Rimmer asks the questions, how can we be ambushed by 5 black holes? This is when Holly gives the whole spiel about the whole thing being black, but we avoided them, and there's no real resolution. It's just Holly. Lister is bringing in Rimmer's valuables onto the ship. He has toy soldier collectibles. Rimmer also apparently has about 24 grand in saved money in his footlocker. And of course, Lister just brought his guitar. And when you look at the back screen when they're in the cockpit, there's this obviously kind of early CGI screen that you can kind of tell. It's not too distracting. But while they're in Starbug, Kat and Crichton take the blue midget shuttle, which we've seen before. And so they all depart differently, and their plan is to rendezvous after Holly supposedly navigates the black holes. Lister calls out Rimmer about his obsession at one point with war and war leaders and military leaders, and Rimmer says it's about leadership, and Lister calls him out for basically being a coward. It makes no sense, and of course this leads Lister to recount about some sort of fight that was all started because of Rimmer, and Rimmer ran away. And he talks about how General leaves behind. They had the tent and the wine and the cognac. It's all ridiculous. But then Rimmer tells why. He apparently was young. He went to Macedonia. He was seeing the sights, and he visited the palace that was once Alexander the Great's. He felt at home in that palace. And years later, with some hypnotherapist he befriended, he found out that he had lived there in the past. Was he Alexander the Great? Of course not. No, he was the Alexander the Great's chief eunuch, to which Lister basically, I believe that. And of course, this is when Rimmer then goes on to talk about how he can't to this day not wince when he sees nutcrackers. But the idea of him having no balls is very on par. Talking a bit when all of a sudden they get hit by a fireball and they crash into a snowy barren moon. We get a lot of Arctic B-roll footage played in here to let us know just how terrible this planet is. Lister tries to go outside to dig them out, but the weather basically blows him away, and he barely gets back to the ship. Rimmer is sending out Mayday, and apparently it's been freeze days, and they're freezing. Of course, this Rimmer, and then they're also running out of food. And Rimmer is less considerate since he doesn't need food; he's already dead. They need more firewood because Lister needs to stay warm. Lister is suffering while Rimmer is continuing to send out Maydays, and then he asks, why do we call it Mayday? It's only a bank holiday. Why don't we call it the Ascension Day? And Lister then tries to justify it by saying it's French for help me. And after looking it up, interestingly enough, Lister's right. He's not a complete dummy. It is French for help me. So, look at him. All right. He's looking through these books, and he feels like the books are taunting him with their titles. And these are Rimmer's books. And Rimmer tries to talk Lister about anything but food, and because Lister asks him and tells him about how losing his virginity, claims he doesn't remember, and Lister says that that's crap. Everybody does. And Rimmer basically kind of comes around to the idea, tells him he feels, I guess he would say himself, a bit asexual. And he did have sex with a girl named Sandra in the back of his brother's car, and when Lister asks him to sort of describe it, he remembers the car. I feel like this is a very Jeremy Clarkson moment. Maybe a James May? Who knows? If you know Top Gear, you know. Lister apparently lost his one night on a golf course. Goes into lots of detail about being young, and this is really starting to disturb Rimmer. Like, how young? 12. 12! This very much shocks Rimmer. Not even a member of the golf club is what he really gets onto about. And then he talks about how at one point Porky, who we remember, the second mention of Porky, threw Rimmer into the bins when he was 12 with his shoes on. Lister ends up burning some of the books to stay warm. 3 days basically without food, and the walls, and this is one of the things that Rimmer says, 3 days without food and the walls of civilization become crumbling down. Rimmer trying to talk to him about Shakespeare. Rimmer has never read it, though. He tries to basically do this whole little opening speech of Richard III, now, and that's it. It's the now is the winter of artist content. Thank you, Arnold. Lister is going to burn Lolita. Rimmer tells him, you can, but just take out apparently an excerpt of page 61, which he does, and he says, after saying gross, yeah, I'm assuming what we know might be on that page. Finally, they do end up burning Shakespeare, and Lister is reduced to eating the dog food, which he had said earlier he didn't want to eat, or he was more open to eating it than the pot noodle, which he hates pot noodles. And apparently now it's been 6 days. So they finally run out of book to burn, and they need to burn something. And so he decides, we're going to burn the collectible figures, Rimmer, but they end up burning the 24 grand instead. Lister ends up giving this speech about how it's just stuff. You know, Rimmer says, what about the guitar? And Lister immediately turns on the situation, is like, no, and gives all the same justifications he just spoke out against to try and defend it. Lister says it's his only lifeline from, basically the depression and loneliness of being the only last human alive. He had no roots, no parents, no education. Rimmer says, but what about, he's like, oh yeah, art school, that's not education. Lister pretends then to burn his guitar. But this is when Rimmer decides to give him some privacy while he plays it. He leaves, and Lister then stashes it in a closet with a spacesuit, and then proceeds, after he's cut out a cutout version from the only thing that, or almost semi-homeless thing that Rimmer has left, which is his box. Rimmer comes back, and he feels bad about this sacrifice, and then changes opinion of Lister. He feels all like, you really are a stand-up guy. And the whole time Lister is feeling very guilty about this, because it was not his guitar. It was a cutout version of it from the back of Rimmer's chest. His trunk, the only thing his father ever gave him. It is so cringe. It gets really cringy. Tells Lister to burn the wooden soldiers. So they do. And then he smells, and he's like, that's comfort wood. It's the same thing that his chest is made of, and he thinks Lister's guitar was made of it. It must be worth a fortune. And at this point, right when everything's about to come out, Crichton Cat finally arrived to save the day, just as the toy soldiers are burning, and Lister gives like this whole gives up this whole little like salute to them. Lister, like I said, Lister is about to confess when they arrive, and they rendezvoused with Holly, and they came to find out there were no black holes. It was just 5 specks on the scope, grit, that Holly couldn't discern. Rimmer goes on praising Lister to the group. When Lister finally comes back in, reaches in the closet, gets his guitar, and walks out in shame in front of Rimmer. Rimmer finally puts it all together. He finds the damage Lister did in the suitcase, thanks to Crichton, and then tells Crichton to get a hacksaw. They're going to go make Lister a eunuch. Great bottle episode. So that brings us to the end. Next time we'll be looking at episode 3 of series 3, Polymorph, which I know is a good one. So, in the meantime, though, please join, like, subscribe, comment, share. Tell me things you want to see, things I can do to make this experience more entertaining. I'm very open to those ideas. Please feel to write into us. We will reply, or if not reply, we'll at least listen and read it. You never know. But in the meantime, we are now finished with the prequels of the Star Wars trilogy over on our main podcast, Off the Reel. So you can now listen to our thoughts on the original prequels. As we move on to Solo, we are covering only the Star Wars films in chronological order in universe. If you also want to, there's little excerpts of my son, who is a diehard Clone Wars and Star Wars fan himself, jumping in there. Believe me, he does not get to hear what Casey and them say about him, because sometimes they're just mean to a kid. He's only 9. But there's that. If that's not your thing, you want a different flavor, we have Thinking About Thinking with Dr. Kristen and I, where we get into things. We recently talked about DYOR, do your own research. Those are a little bit shorter podcasts. We get into like academics, teaching, and all that stuff. And if that's not your flavor, you can check out Wrestling with the Horror of It All, where Casey and Eric, the other not funny guys, Kristen is our not funny gal, they get into wrestling and horror movies. And you can find their podcast, and you can find some of their promotional material here on YouTube as well. They've been uploading some of their stuff because they're going to Horror Nights in Orlando later this month. And they'll be putting out a whole slew of content from there. So you should follow along, and all our socials and everything are down in the description. Please follow, join us, like, subscribe to whatever you feel works for you. And recently, and this should be coming out soon, I don't know when Casey's going to be releasing it, but we did a Terrifier marathon while Casey engaged in the Hot Wings Challenge, and we were joined by special guest Ron Deanna from Ron Watches and his little YouTube channel, so shout out to him there as well. And they did that. Casey was not fazed by the Hot Wings Challenge. He did it 3 times too, folks, for each of the movies. And those movies were horrible. But I digress. Not my flavor. I built Legos while we watched. So that's what I did. So, like I said, like, subscribe, comment, join us. Keep it not funny, and don't be a smeghead. And I'll see you next time.